Om Jananim Saradam Devim Ramakrishnam Jagatgurum Padapadme Tayo Shritva Pranamami Muhurmuhu. So today we will be discussing Sri Ramakrishna, the Great Master. Last Sunday we discussed about Sri Ramakrishna's message, that is the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna. So one of the reasons why we alternate between the life and message is very often, or at least in the spiritual field, it is the life of a prophet or incarnation or a saint has to be intimately understood, studied, and connected with his message. The message cannot be understood or heard or read independent of the life. So their life is their message. And whatever they speak, whatever message is given by these prophets, by these incarnations, that message is seen to be lived in their life 100%. It's not that they speak something and they lead a life different from what they preach. So the importance of an incarnation's biography is that the message cannot be understood. His words, the message as we get it from the various scriptures, whether it is the Bible, the words of Jesus Christ, or it is Sri Krishna's message that we find in the Mahabharata, in the Bhagavad Gita, and in other scriptures, we cannot read and understand those messages or the true import, the true spiritual import of that message without understanding the life of that incarnation or avatara who has given that message. So the idea behind studying the Great Master is right from childhood, these divine qualities which he spoke of in later days when he spoke to the devotees after his sadhana period was over. If we see, the Great Master can be divided into 5 major parts. 5 major parts, or it's 5 different books actually, which has been combined either in 1 volume or in 2 volumes. So the first part is Sri Ramakrishna's, as we discussed, it's the divine play of Sri Ramakrishna as a child. Balya Bhav, it is in Bengali, it is known as Balya Bhav. So that is the first part of the 5-part biography that Swami Shardananji wrote. The second part is when he grows up, the Divya Leela continues. It's not that when he was young or when he was a child, he did not perform any Leela. The Leela can be seen, the divine play can be seen even before his birth. The circumstances that led to the birth we saw. Then we saw not only the circumstances that led to the visions his father and mother had before his birth, we saw that. And even the birth was full of supernatural events. And that confirmed the visions which his father had in Gaya or the mother had in front of the Shiva temple, that a divine incarnation will be born in that house. And his father was very guileless. He was wondering, how can I take care if an incarnation is born in my house? If God himself, Ishvara himself, Vishnu, Gadadhar, the vision which he saw in Gaya was that Vishnu himself is born as his son. So if Vishnu himself comes, then how can I look after him? I am such a poor person. So Kshudiram was, on one side, he was full of fear, whether he can do justice. If the incarnation is born, it's so difficult to serve him with the limited means that he has. So as the child grew up, and we see that his initiation into student life was very interesting. Kshudiram observed with lot of fear, at the same time there was joy. And he saw that Gadadhar was growing up growing up, and the child had extraordinary memory and talents. So taking the lively boy on his lap, Kshudiram would repeat the names of his ancestors and chant various salutation mantras, that is pranam mantra for different gods and goddesses. That is how uh, gods and goddesses used to be worshipped in those days. Even today, we not only repeat the various hymns, the different gods and goddesses are worshipped with different mantras, and there are different pranam mantras. There are different mantras which we address to different gods and goddesses, and various stories from Ramayana and Mahabharata. They were very common in those days. In a village like Kamarpukur, where a lot of spiritual knowledge would be shared by the minstrels, by the people who obviously they just expected a few alms, these bowls and other people. They would be just satisfied with a little food. They would wander from place to place and then chant this wonderful, memorize these stotras, repeat it, and even in colloquial Bengali, in the rural language, it would be expressed. Their feelings, the devotion, and all these things would be expressed. Culture was transmitted through these unselfish people who just needed a little food and a little to just survive, and maybe some accommodation where they could rest. But most of the time it was these wandering minstrels. They are popularly known as bowls. They have renounced the world. Maybe they are living in a family, but they would be happy with whatever nature provides them wherever they go, in exchange for the wonderful culture, the wonderful spiritual culture that they spread all over. They move from town to town, village to village, and that was a great tradition. Of course, it is slowly vanishing now. Other means are there where books have been printed in large numbers. In those days, the literacy levels were very low. So it is only through these means, word of mouth, these values were conveyed, and it is a very effective means of transmitting knowledge, especially spiritual knowledge. Because you see, one important fact we have to remember, that unlike secular knowledge, bookish knowledge or academic knowledge doesn't really help in spiritual pursuits. The knowledge has to become part of your psyche. For that, you have to memorize these things. They have to be internalized. That is why you could find Swami Vivekananda's mother remembering the Ramayana and Mahabharata. Of course, Ramayana and Mahabharata have different versions. They have colloquial versions. All people did not know Sanskrit. The common man's language, the most of the Ramayana versions of Ramayana, like Tulsi Ramayana, is spoken in the language of that particular region by Tulsidas. He made it easy so that people can memorize the whole Tulsi Ramayana and recite it. So also in Bengal, there are different versions of Bengali Ramayana based on the Valmiki Ramayana, of course, but these stories from Ramayana and Mahabharata were transmitted from one generation to another by these people. So various stories from the Ramayana and Mahabharata Sri Ramakrishna, though he never took his schooling very seriously, he had the benefit of listening to this. That's why when somebody asked Sri Ramakrishna, how could he remember so many things? How could he remember the things that he had heard? He says, you never went to school, you never went to any educational institution. Though he briefly attended the school, we'll see that in his childhood, how he was they tried to initiate him into school life, student life, but they failed because though he was a student, and as in his own language, if we see Sri Ramakrishna's language, as long as I live, so long do I learn. So we find that while describing the student life of Sri Ramakrishna, Swami Shardanand gives the wonderful methods that were prevailing at that time, and how education in the real sense of the term, not the education that we have now. It was a complete education, not just education for a living, but education to fulfill life's purpose, the purpose of life. Those were handed from generation to generation in a wonderful system of, you may say, varnashrama dharma, varna and ashrama. So every ashrama or every stage of life, there were different techniques or different ways that these cultural and spiritual values would be transmitted. So that is how Shudiram saw that even though he was a very small child, he was very lively and he had a wonderful memory. So whatever mantras were uttered, whatever stories were told to him, Sri Ramakrishna would remember everything verbatim. Not only that, he was a very good actor. So when he tested, his father started testing, because his father himself was a teacher, in the sense he was teaching the rituals, and he in fact ran a toll. Toll means a Sanskrit school where the puja and all the other mantras and all the names, short hymns and salutation mantras for different gods and goddesses, the vidhi which they do in puja, those things were taught for people who would take up priesthood as their main source of or main means of livelihood. So that that kind of education was given through tolls. And in fact, in Jamapukur, Sri Ramakrishna's elder brother ran a toll. So Kshudiram also, in some way or the other, used to teach young Brahmin boys who used to come to him. So Kshudiram tested his own son with the other students, and he noticed that most of those hymns, Sri Ramakrishna could repeat after hearing them only once. They call in Sanskrit, it is known as Shruti Dhara. Shruti Dhara means one who can retain in one's memory anything that he hears only once. Their memory is so powerful that even if they hear it once, they will remember. When the young boy Gadadhar was asked to repeat those hymns and stories after many days, after several days had passed when he had first heard them, he could do so without faltering. That's what Swami Shardanand writes. And at the same time, that though Kshudiram discovered that though the boy was very keen to learn all these things and absorbed many subjects like Sanskrit, recitation, art, he could make wonderful drawings and paintings, he could make statues. He was very good in that. But at the same time, he noticed that his son Gadadhar remained indifferent to some subjects. Now, what were these subjects? He remained, not that he was not intelligent enough to grasp. He felt it is not necessary for me. And his spiritual pursuits, he thought these subjects, in fact, will be a great obstacle. So one of the subjects was Shudiram discovered that while he was teaching Gadadhar multiplication or addition or subtraction, he felt Sri Ramakrishna disliked all these things. He disliked mathematics because when he saw that Shudiram saw that Gadadhar would become extremely restless. Whereas if some hymns were to be repeated, he would remember them with lot of interest, he would remember them and then reproduce them whenever necessary. So Shudiram, though he sent him to school, the local Kamarpukur school at the age of 5, there is a ceremony they normally perform for the commencement of their study. So after that, at the age of 5, normally they used to be sent to school. So he saw that Gadadhar was very happy to be acquainted and mix with other children, a very lively child. And his loving nature also made him very popular with his friends and teacher. But as when it came to learning mathematics and other secular subjects were concerned, he expressed a strong distaste for those subjects. But he felt, Shudiram knew his background, the visions that he had. He knew that this child is born for following a spiritual pursuit. He's not one who's going to go after secular education and a career in the sense a worldly career. But at the same time, he was not remaining aloof or not mixing with others. He was very lively. Whatever he did, whatever dramas he enacted, whatever subjects he liked, he shared with his friends and he excelled in those. That's why he became very popular. Though he was not very good at some subjects, his father did not force him. Shudiram did not force him that you have to learn mathematics like most of the parents do now. They decide what the young children have to learn or should learn. They don't give them the freedom to pick up the subjects and learn. It's not possible nowadays. Things have become so regimental, you can say. Things have become so regimental that people, even if they want some kind of freedom in choosing the subjects they would like to study, they are not allowed to do so. So the primary school was held in a spacious theatre hall in front of the house of Lahas, the village landlords. So very often the village landlord would give his own building which he had, or maybe a theatre hall which they normally enacted dramas during puja festivals. Some of these zamindars allowed their premises where these big halls were built because they had a lot of money, they could afford to build these halls. So Laha was a family, a very rich landlord or zamindar. So he asked the children of the village to use his the spacious theatre hall, because when of course the celebrations and the functions took place, the school would not be there. But most of the throughout the year, most of the days, the hall would not be used. At that time, it was used as a school, as a temporary school for children. Not temporary, it's a regular school. So the Lahas established the school for the good of the village children. So the school was very close to Kshudiram's house. This Laha, they were actually neighbors. And it was open every day in the mornings and afternoons. It was a very, very simple type of routine they had. There was nothing formal about that school. But children would arrive early in the morning, study for 2-3 hours, then go back, eat, have a nice lunch and take bath and all, and then come back again at 3 or 4, and then they would return before sunset. So young students like Gadadhar, of course, when they were just 5, they would not be asked or expected to study for such a long period. But still, they were free to remain at the school. After finishing their lessons during the study period, they would either sit in their places or play nearby with the friends. Even play, work and play and study all were combined together. There was no hard and fast rule. There was so much of flexibility, and learning was a great joy for these children. The older students, in turn, would coach the newer ones and check to see whether they had learned their lessons. Whatever subjects they knew, the senior students would teach the juniors, the younger students. And Swami Shardanji writes that there was only one teacher. There was only one teacher for all the subjects, yet all the activities of the school proceeded smoothly because of this wonderful system where the elder students would teach the younger ones and learning would take place in a very natural surrounding. So when Gadadhar was first admitted, Jadunath Sarkar was the teacher. Shortly after he retired for various reasons, there was another teacher whose name was Rajendranath Sarkar. So there is a brief account of this schooling which Gadadhar had. Now, the next paragraph says the wonderful dreams and visions that Shudiram had. He had experienced before Gadadhar's birth as a sign of his great life to come, left a permanent impression on his mind. Actually, the visions were so powerful. You see, they were not just dreams or something casual. They were very strong and powerful visions. And that had created a great impression on the mind of Shudiram, because he knew for certain that this vision was not an ordinary vision. That Gadadhar saying that Vishnu himself telling him in Gaya that he'll be born as his son. So whenever he saw Gadadhar display some kind of naughty behavior or childlike, immature behavior, he was afraid to scold him. He tried to discipline him in a very mild manner. So there was not only love but a little bit of fear that I should be dealing with the incarnation, because he knew fully well that the divine has incarnated as his child Gadadhar. Gadadhar himself has incarnated. Gadadhar Vishnu has incarnated as Siram, as he was named Gadadhar, of course, and later on he was named Ramakrishna. But because if you see, in most of the family names began with Ram, because Ram was their Ishta. Ram Kumar, then Rameshwar, Shudhi Ram, Hriday Ram. So different names with permutations and combinations of the word Ram were there. So whenever he saw Gadadhar displaying some, behaving in a very naughty manner, very restless and joyful, of course he was very joyful, he never did any serious mischief, but whenever he saw some kind of naughty behavior, unlike other boys and boys, he would not discipline him, he would not force him to do something. He allowed him a lot of freedom, either because the boy enjoyed too much attention from everyone or because of his inherent nature. So he saw that everybody, very strangely, was attracted, just as Sri Krishna was the center of attraction for everybody in his childhood, not only in Gokul but later on in Vrindavan as well. Till he left Vrindavan at the age of 14, he was sought by everyone. The gopis wanted to mix with him, the Gopalas or his shepherd friends also, children of other shepherds were also very keen to mix with him. So he was the center of attraction of the village. Shudiram saw that his son is getting so much attention from everyone, and he knew that because of the inherent divinity that he has brought with him, he believed that he should not interfere in his life, because he is an incarnation, he knows what he wants to do. So he was fully convinced that vision was not an ordinary vision. It was such a strong vision that he got convinced. He was convinced that the divine Lord has been born as Gadadhar. So Kshudiram also noticed that the self-willed boy, he saw there was a tremendous sense of self-confidence and a determination to do things what he thought was right. So this self-willed boy would sometimes go with his friends to play outside the village rather than going to school. Or he would attend an open-air dramatic performance without asking his father's permission. But Kshudiram did not scold the boy as other parents would have. Other parents would have scolded their children because they knew, they were keen that the child does well academically. Whereas knowing fully the greatness of this divine child, Kshudiram thought, I should not be interfering. The Lord knows how he wants to perform his Leela, or the divine play is unfolding even in the child. Even as a child, we see, just as in Krishna's life, the divine play unfolded right from childhood. He did so many wonderful things. So here also, even if he missed school, he did not pay proper attention to mathematics and other such subjects, but he would be interested in drama, interested in cultural dramas, spiritual dramas, and without taking permission, he was free to go and attend any such performance or jatra or anything. But Kshudiram did not scold the parent like other parents would have scolded you without telling you're going here and there, you're not attending school. So most of the parents pressurize the children to do things as they want the children to do. So whenever Gadadhar began anything, one thing his father noticed, he could not stop till it was finished. This is one thing which even Master Mahasaya noticed. Even when he was in Dakshineshwar, suddenly he will say, he was a Sankalpa Siddha Purusha. What is Sankalpa Siddha? Sankalpa Siddha means whenever a thought comes to your mind, you act upon it. In Bengali, it is known as Manumukh Ek Kara. Man means you think something, you speak the same thing, and you act upon it. So, through thought, through words, and through action, one should be the same. So that is why Sri Ramakrishna used to say, that was his great message. When he said, why don't people realize God? Why there is no spiritual progress in life? So he used to say, Manmukh Ek Kara. Manmukh means make your mind and thought, your mind and words and actions the same. So Kshudiram noticed this wonderful quality. And as Master Mahasaya used to point out, that once he made a sankalpa that I will go and have darshan of Ma Kali, he will get up. And then nothing could stop him till he finished whatever sankalpa was there in his mind. That is what is known as making the thought, the mind, and the actions the same. So Master Mahasaya observes, not only in the gospel, but in the other books which were compiled. Most of his conversations were also recorded in some of the books which were published much later. They are known, they were recorded by Swami Nityatmananda, who was very close to Master Mahasaya. So they act as a companion volume to the gospel. There are many incidents which Swami, Master Mahasaya Mahendranath Gupta used to mention to his to devotees and to other people who wanted to know something about Sri Ramakrishna. Many things are not recorded in the gospel, but they have been recorded in this set of books which Nityatmananji has published later on. Swami Nityatmananji used to listen to M expounding not only the gospel but the message of Sri Ramakrishna, and whatever he spoke, just as M recorded Sri Ramakrishna's gospel, this Nityatmananda recorded whatever Master Mahasaya later said about Sri Ramakrishna. About many things are not found in the gospel. So these are additional things. So also there he writes, M writes, that whenever Sri Ramakrishna decided to do one thing, anything, he would not stop till it was finished. It may be a trivial thing, like we sometimes make a resolution. We think that, oh, now I will go and do this. The thought has come, the words have also come out of our mouth, but unfortunately we don't carry it out into action. So that means that we are not sincere. But Sri Ramakrishna could not do that. If he once says, if the thought comes that I should go and visit, then nobody on the way can stop him. He would not, in fact, see anybody on the way. He will just ignore them and just walk and reach till he finished doing pranams or going to the temple or whatever had occurred to his mind. And he spoke about it, that I wish to go to the temple. So he'll first go to the temple. Afterwards, the people who wanted to ask him something, they can come and ask him there. But on the way, nobody could stop him. So that is what Kshudiram noticed, that whenever Gadadhar began anything, whether it is drama, whether it is making an image of Shiva, or he used to make beautiful images from clay, from the clay which they collected from the pond. They could make statues when they dry. He could make wonderful shapes. He could make Shiva, he could make Ganesha, so many statues he used to make. So whenever he started to do something, he never left it halfway. And he saw to it that whatever he has started should be finished. And he never tried to conceal any of his actions through lying. And his loving heart never induced him to harm anyone. So these are the three qualities which we observe in Swami Sharadanandji's life, in biography of Sri Ramakrishna. He says that he could never conceal anything. He was like a child. Normally, it is considered to be a sign of maturity when you don't give out your intentions to anybody. Said only mature people can, but that is not what Sri Ramakrishna wanted us to do. He did not want that you think of something and do something else, then people will not trust you. So Sri Ramakrishna could never lie. He could not conceal in his actions. Whatever he felt was true, he expressed. So that way he had a childlike behavior. And his loving heart at the same time never induced him to harm anyone. Not having any choice, not concealing his actions doesn't mean that he would do bad actions and harm anybody and everybody according to his whims and fancies. He didn't do that because he had a loving heart, and he definitely did not do any action which would harm anyone. So if somebody approached him with some question, whether it is a young child or a grown-up man, he would be frank. He would never conceal his actions. But at the same time, there are some people who are frank. Holy Mother used to say, if somebody is lame, don't ask him, how did you lose your leg? You know it is truth. You are not speaking an untruth. You are asking him a true question. But don't say anything that hurts others. So that's why frank people, sometimes people who can't conceal anything, they sometimes speak something which they don't mean, and then finally it hurts so many people. So his loving heart, Sri Ramakrishna's loving heart, never induced him to harm anyone, even by word, by thought and deed, leave alone by deed. So he was practicing ahimsa the correct way that it should be. But despite all these good qualities, Kshudiram was concerned by one thing. When the boy was forbidden to do something, he would disobey, unless he was given convincing reasons for the instruction. So nobody could force him to do, forbid him to do, don't do this. If the parents say that if you don't give him a convincing reason, he will not obey. That is the sign, that is the tenacity that Sri Ramakrishna as Gadadhar had, even though he was a child, he had to be convinced that this is the right path. He had good qualities, but if you forbid him to do something, then you have to explain why it should not be done or why it should be done. So whenever any do's or don'ts were explained to him, he said why. He would ask counter questions. So unless one gave convincing reasons for instruction, he would not do anything. He would not be forced to do anything. So Gadadhar's nature compelled him to inquire about the reason for everything. So that is how Swamiji also went. That is why he supported Swamiji. When Swami Vivekananda asked him questions, questioned him, even criticized him, he didn't get upset because that was his own nature when Gadadhar was young. So it was possible that occasionally, very often, the boy might not follow the conventional rules of good conduct. At this time, an incident raised all these thoughts in Shudiram's mind concerning the boy. He was a little worried. See, if he behaves like this, if he just speaks his mind out, sometimes he will land himself in trouble. But when he saw that he never caused harm to others, he understood Gadadhar's nature, and then Shudiram was very careful. He didn't force or didn't scold him, allowed him to grow the way he wanted. So there is a beautiful incident which Swami Shardananji mentions. Perhaps he had heard from somebody in Kamarpukur. There is a big pond which is known as Haldar Pond, near Shudiram's house. The villagers used its clean and pure water for drinking, cooking, and bathing. And it had two bathing ghats, one for men and other for women. Naturally, they were different ghats. The ghats where men went, where women were not supposed to go, and where women went on that ghat was never to be used by men. Now, young boys like Gadadhar, sometimes they were young, they would not strictly follow the rule and go to the men's ghat. They would sometimes go to the women's ghat. So one day, very innocently, of course, Gadadhar went to the women's ghat with some of his small young friends and created a disturbance. They were restless children. All of them were swimming, jumping, and splashing water on these women. The women found it very difficult to have their bath. They said, what kind of behavior this Gadadhar has? So according to custom, some elderly women engaged in prayer after their bath, and they were distracted by the boys splashing. Some of them, after the bath ritual, some would be sitting for prayer while still in the water. So that was the custom in those days. But these boys used to go and create such a big sound that their prayers were disturbed. So they told the boys to stop, but they would not. But they could not quiet them. Then one of the women angrily scolded them, saying, "Why do you come to this ghat? Can you not go to the men's ghat? Here women wash their clothes after bathing. Don't you know that it is bad for you if you watch when women change their clothes?" So logically, these children were not aware. They were all very innocent. But Gadadhar asked her why, and she continued to scold him instead of explaining the reason why the boy should not come and disturb the privacy of these women. But seeing that the women were irritated and fearing that they might complain to their parents, the boys left. So Gadadhar thought, what is wrong if I take a bath? See, it was not that because he was innocent, he just wanted a proper reason, that's all. Once that reason was told, he never went back. So that elderly woman who used to scold without giving any reason, he was admonished and he didn't like it. So he went and told that woman, yesterday I saw 2 women taking bath, then I saw 6, then I saw 8, but nothing has happened to me. I mean, why do you prevent us from taking bath in the same ghat as the women? The woman went to Chandra Devi and complained. She said, you see what your young boy is saying. He doesn't have any sense or discrimination between what should be done or what should not be done. So Chandra Devi later convinced Gadadhar by and gently told Gadadhar in a very convincing way, my son, it is true. Nothing bad will happen to you if you watch the women bathing. But you should remember that they will feel humiliated. So immediately they are like me. If you dishonor them, it is the same as dishonoring me. So in future, don't be disrespectful towards women. It is good to, is it good to hurt them as well as me? Gadadhar understood, and once the reason was given, he never again disobeyed or went to this place. But he wanted a reason for everything. Why should I do it? Then, of course, mother was patient enough. She tried to explain, and that is how children should be told. If they are simply admonished and told, do this or do that, then nobody listens, because people have a tendency, especially young children, to do the exact opposite. They have to be told as if they are grown-up people. They should be treated like grown-up people, and they should be told what is to be done, what is not to be done, why it is not to be done. Unless you give the reason, the children, you cannot expect the children to follow you. They are in fact more keen to know the why and how of everything. How to do it, why to do it, why should I not do this? This questioning attitude is always fresh in the children's mind. That is why they ask so many questions. Unfortunately, the parents don't have time to answer these questions. And when you snub these people, that's why Abdul Kalam said that I fortunately had teachers who never snubbed me. No matter how silly the question is, with lot of patience, the teacher would teach the children. So, Sri Ramakrishna's case, giving this incident, Swami Shardananji shows that he knew everybody was scolding him and saying that you should not go there in the women's garden. But why should I not go? Then when Chandra Devi called him and said, my dear child, if you go there, nothing will happen to you, but they will feel humiliated. So you should not go. So that convinced the young child Gadadhar, and then from that day onwards, he obeyed these instructions from these elderly people, if provided they convinced him why they were giving him those instructions, why it is not considered to be good. All he wanted to know is get convincing answers for everything he did, not just do something because everybody else is doing it. That was how he was trained. I mean, he got his training, and he was lucky that he had a father like Shudiram who allowed him the freedom to ask questions. And Chandra Devi, his own mother, was also who loved him so much that she also very nicely took care of the upbringing of Sri Ramakrishna and allowed him to hew out his own path, to create a own path for himself. Because now and then they were reminded of the divinity manifest in young Gadadhar. He was an incarnation of Ishvara, he is the incarnation of Vishnu. So does he not know what is right, what is wrong? So that is why we find that during the period of his education, he was lucky enough to have a father like Shudiram who would give freedom to Gadadhar to study whatever he liked, whatever interested him, and not force anything that he disliked. So Gadadhar thus, though he was not interested in some subjects, he made fair progress in school. And they say within a short time, he was able to read and write. When you say Sri Ramakrishna was unlettered, that doesn't mean that he could not read and write. In fact, his handwriting was very good. There is a manuscript where he wrote a lot of passages in a beautiful Bengali handwriting. Anyway, within a short period, we see that Gadadhar was not only able to read and write, but also they found that he was making a lot of progress in many other fields like sculpture and making images of gods and goddesses. Used to go there and see how they were making the statues and stand there for hours together. So his schooling was done in a very unconventional way, and Sri Ramakrishna used to go there. He also learned the art of molding statues, using molding the clay and make statues, and started to practice it at home. And this became one of his important hobbies. Similarly, met painters and began to paint pictures like they did. So wherever there was any exposition of Purana or Yatra, dramas which convey some deep message, he attended and he learned just by listening the myths of the Puranas. So that's why though he did not go to any formal school, he did not need to do it, because he had that intense desire. And to use his own words, he said, as long as I live, so long do I learn. So it was a long journey that he undertook. I mean, his life or his schooling was a long journey where he decided what he will study. Whatever he liked, he studied. Whatever brought out the divine elements from within, noble elements, he did. So whenever he heard any exposition of the Puranas or a yatra performed in the village, in Bengal it is very common, he loved to hear them. He used to carefully observe how they were acting and how they presented and how the audience responded. So all these fine tricks of drama or any performance, he knew just by observation. And he also carefully observed the type of presentation that most appealed to the audience. So he also knew that other people who come to assemble and learn or witness these dramas, what is their opinion and what is it that attracted so many people. So his extraordinary memory and intelligence helped him in those pursuits. So what helped him? This keen sense of observation, this keen idea, this idea to ask questions and seek answers from some competent authority. That is what Swami Shardananji says Sri Ramakrishna underwent when he was growing old, when he was in school. So, but one thing he noticed, Gadadhar Kshudiram noticed that his memory and capacity to understand things, that is known as dhi, that was very powerful. And that was the power that helped him in his pursuit. Whatever he wanted, whatever he felt comfortable doing, which would enhance or maybe cultivate the spiritual virtues, whatever he felt like doing, he did. And nobody, not even the villagers and the teachers and the other, would stop him, because everybody loved him and everybody thought he was the one who's doing the right thing all the time. Because when an incarnation comes, he doesn't take any false steps. As Sri Ramakrishna himself said, an expert dancer will never take a false step. So also with these hobbies or with these wonderful studies, wonderful techniques of studies and the content that he chose for himself, all these things we have to remember and see that it was his extraordinary memory and intelligence to understand in depth, not just committing to rote memory certain verses and certain scriptures. Whatever he heard, he could not only remember, but he also had a wonderful memory and intelligence. Even after many years, if somebody reminded him, he could still go back to that idea or that verse. So from one hand, from an early age, the ever cheerful Gadadhar, that was one of his qualities, developed a wonderful sense of humor and fantastic skills of imitation. He could imitate anybody. He could imitate men, he could imitate women, he could imitate fools, he could imitate a professor, a wise person, anybody. He was expert in imitating others. He was very good because Swami Chardanji says this is a quality which helps a person to focus. If you have that, imitation means what? Somebody speaks in a particular way, we try to bring out the same voice and repeat it from our memory. So, his keen sense of humor and fantastic scales of imitation. And he began to mimic the peculiar gesture of both men and women. On the other hand, his natural simplicity and devotion to God and are ideal examples, and his ideal example of his parents, whom he observed in their day-to-day activities, helped him to make rapid progress in spiritual life. Because from everywhere, Gadadhar was supported, he was given the right type of education, not only by his father, but others who understood perhaps that here is a divine personality and he doesn't need our advice. But at the same time, we have to understand the message. To understand the message, we have to read the life. If you have read the life, thoroughly absorbed it, assimilated it, then only we can get a peep into the message. We can understand the true import of the message. Otherwise, it is not possible. So we will conclude now. If there are some questions, I would like to take it. Otherwise, we'll. I think all of you could watch properly. There was no signal problem. Okay. So I don't see anybody asking questions. So we'll continue with the gospel in our next class. But today we saw how Sri Ramakrishna, especially when his Balya Leela or divine play of childhood was described, there were certain characteristics which were not so usually associated with the young children of that age. Sri Ramakrishna was far, far superior to these boys because that inclination was there, that curiosity was there. What is the truth? How do I reach the truth? So wherever he heard any path that promised him to take to, promised him that he would grow spiritually, he would run after it. So he says, even in his later years, Sri Ramakrishna always remembered and acknowledged his indebtedness to his parents with gratitude. Now, the parents were the ones who really were responsible for his education. So that was the real education, man-making education, the saint-making education, if we can call it. So that is how Shudiram also, knowing fully the divinity of the child Gadadhar, allowed him to acquire learning in his own way. So we will take your leave now. I don't see any questions, so I'll fine. Om Shanti 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 Hari Om Tat Sat Shri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu.